Hello everybody and welcome to your PAiCE Workshop. PAiCE means Prioritising Agronomy in Changing Environments. I'm Dr. Brendan Brown and I'm a social scientist with Australia's national science body, CSIRO. And I'm really excited to have you all here to discuss climate change adaptation priorities. It's also exciting because you're feeding into a global discussion on climate change adaptation. But before we go any further, you're probably curious about what PAiCE is. So we've prepared a short little video for you.
There may never have been a more uncertain time to be a farmer. Environments are changing, driven by climatic hazards that interact with ever-present production constraints to create challenges to increasing, or in many cases even maintaining, current agricultural productivity. To address this, more and more solutions have been proposed to help farmers, but such has been the proliferation that it can be hard to understand where investments can generate the highest benefits. More and more, we can fall into the trap of pushing forward with existing beliefs and assumptions without stopping to consider a wide array of different possible solutions for a given location. The PAiCE framework, short for Prioritising Agronomy in Changing Environments, is a collaboration between Australia's National Science Agency, CSIRO, Cornell University, and the CGIAR Excellence in Agronomy 2030 program. It aims to help decision makers understand the different opportunities that can help address both climate hazards and production constraints in a target agroecology. It does this in a participatory workshop setting with decision makers who have come together to discuss how to address the key challenges to a location that inhibit maintaining and improving agricultural productivity. Through communal learning, a target agroecology is framed in terms of the system, climate hazards or production constraints, and adaptation options. At the end, the group will have a prioritised set of investment options that highlight the value proposition and feasibility of different potential solutions. In this way, a clearer picture can be formed to understand the highest value, most feasible, and most inclusive pathways to prioritise investments in agronomy in a changing environment.
The first question you might have is, why do we need the PAiCE tool? We know that agriculture operates within a changing environment, and climate change is a key driver of the need to rethink agricultural production systems. In most cases, there are going to be many different adaptation options for climate change, but there isn't a structured way to analyse, prioritise, and select different adaptation options. In such circumstances, a void exists, and we can fall back on potential biases, old thinking, and silo science. We think with PAiCE that we have a better way forward. So what is the PAiCE tool? In its current form, the PAiCE tool is an Excel macro-based decision support tool that aims to help decision makers consider the best climate change adaptation options to progress with. Their core aim is to collaboratively discuss and learn about current and projected climate challenges. It does this by first understanding the characteristics and boundaries of a production domain and pairing that with the climate hazards that are expected over the coming 10 years. By doing that, we can ascertain the climate adaptation needs in a particular production domain. What we then can do is compare the climate adaptation options that are available in order to help prioritise climate adaptation strategies. This can be for research, investment, public and private sector scaling, or otherwise, with the core aim to understand what are the next steps and best steps towards climate adaptation programming. So what is the PAiCE approach? The PAiCE approach is about taking a structured approach to characterise and explore potential adaptation solutions in a location. It's about aggregating data from different sources and then having expert elicitation to discuss and to hypothesize around what comes next in adapting to a changing climate. At its core, it's about discussion-based stakeholder consultations. It's about starting the conversation for an evidence-based strategy. And it's not necessarily about consensus. It's also about identifying areas of uncertainty and evidence gaps that need to be followed up on. And it's about getting that first starting point of priorities and then sharing it more widely to make sure that it's valid. What we hope for at the end of going through this process is that investment is steered in its highest impact pathways, and that you might get some coordination between different partners who now know what priorities for different organizations are and who can work on what the best. So it's not just about getting a list, but it's about understanding who can do what, who has priorities where, and making sure that we're all moving in the same direction in a cohesive manner. So how does PAiCE actually work? Well, we start with a defined production domain, and that means an area of land sizable in hectare that has similar crops and similar climate hazards that will affect it over the coming period. We start then by defining the key crops and looking at the system characteristics. The area planted, the average yield, and the value of tonnage for each of those key crops allows us to calculate the economic value of production. After that, we need to consider the climate challenges. To do that, we can list up to 10 climate challenges, and we look at the area impacted for each of those climate hazards and the expected occurrence and severity over the next 10 years. And what we're calculating then is essentially an economic loss model. We know the current value of production for each crop. We know the impact that these key climate challenges are going to have, and so we can calculate the economic loss in terms of lost production. What we then need to do is think about what we can do about this, and that comes through the evaluation of our adaptation options. So we start with a long list of up to 30 options, and then as part of the workshop we bring that down to a maximum of 10 shortlisted high potential options. We take each of those and we look at the impact, the cost, and the value of each of those adaptation options, and that's in terms of the economic value. But on top of that, we also consider technological, societal, environmental, and institutional contexts, because it's not just about the potential value, but it's about what can mean the most now and what also ticks off the co-benefits, the inclusivity, and otherwise that's important to understanding if a technology is appropriate. What we then get is a prioritization of adaptation options. From that, we've got our first step to an evidence-based climate adaptation strategy, and that's essentially where we'll get to at the end of a PAiCE workshop. But of course, beyond the PAiCE tool and the PAiCE workshop is that wider PAiCE approach, and that includes also thinking about the gaps in knowledge, the cross-validation that's needed, and the collaboration that's needed in order to progress. And putting that together, what we get is that cohesive and collaborative climate adaptation strategy and framework. Now that's the theory of PAiCE, but let's look at practically what this might mean as you come through the workshop. The first module, which is usually pre-populated from existing data before the workshop, looks at characterizing the system in terms of key crops. What the tool does is takes up to 12 crops across 3 seasons plus annuals and perennials and ranks out their economic importance to a system. So in the example here, we can see that there were 4 crops that were evaluated, coming from maize in the wet season, being worth economically about double the next crop in sorghum, and working way down through rice and pearl millet. You've got your visual on the side there that gives the rough proportions compared to each other. So the first thing that you get out of running a PAiCE tool is an understanding of the system, of the crops and their economic value. In Module 1, we now understand the key crops in a particular location. Module 2 is then about understanding how climate challenges and hazards interact with those key crops. Module 2 is often done before your workshop as well, but it's often shown to the workshop to understand the assumptions and make sure that the inputs are relevant. So what we get at the end of Module 2, and the output looks like this. At the top, we can see the impact of likely climate challenges. We do that by crop and season, or just by crop or season, or aggregated. So in the case of the results here that we have from Nigeria in West Africa, we can see that the most impactful climate challenge is likely to be drought and dry spells, followed relatively closely by flooding, and then less so the other climate challenges that have occurred. Likewise, we can see that disaggregated between crop season together. The other element that the tool creates is an analysis of vulnerability, as we see in the bottom half. So here we can understand across the different crops and seasons where the most impact in terms of economic value is going to happen. So in this case, we can see that maize is the most likely to be impacted in terms of economic value, followed by sorghum, and then to a lesser extent, rice. In this example, it was only run in a single season analysis with the wet season. But if you have multiple seasons, the tool will also calculate across those different seasons. So the key output of Module 2 is around understanding with a given system that we've inputted in Module 1, which climate hazards are going to be the most impactful and which crops and seasons are going to be the most vulnerable in terms of expected economic loss. Now, what your PAiCE workshop is really focused on is around the adaptation options. So now we know what the system is, and we know the key climate hazards that are going to impact on that system in terms of an economic loss. What we then need to do is understand what we can do about it, and that's what Module 3 is about. So you'll go through a series of sheets that look to evaluate different aspects of each adaptation option that you nominate. And what you'll get is output like this. What are we looking at? The first one is that we can calculate the potential value of adaptation over the next 10 years, assuming full uptake. So we get this value in billion US dollars, and we can take a rank there of the economic potential of each adaptation option with a given challenge scenario of climate hazard, crop, and season. But more importantly, we've also got these other non-economic factors to consider. So we also can generate a contextual score, and that's made up of a number of different options that you will use to evaluate the different technologies. Importantly, the tool also allows you as a group to put a weighting between that economic score and elements of that contextual score to get to your final comparative score. And the top option will give you 100%, and everything below that is ranked in relation to that top option. So in the example up here, what you would see is option B that addresses late winters on wheat in the wet season is the #1 adaptation option. We often see that adaptation options can address more than one climate challenge or challenge scenario. So it also provides you a sum at the end of just your different adaptation options with the potential value, the contextual score, and the comparative score. So this is where we want to get to, where we can start to understand what are our adaptation options in relation to the system and the climate hazards. What's the economic potential? What's the context? And where are the concerns? What do we see that is non-negotiable? If we need to have social inclusion, then we can start to filter things out and have a discussion around that. But the idea is that we've gone through a structured process in order to get to this point. And this is what we'll be trying to populate today through your expert elicitation and discussion. So what might PAiCE mean for your organization? Why should you be a part of this process? Well, the first thing is that hopefully this tool can be used to provide you a process to think about your priorities and your climate change adaptation strategies within your organizations. We can provide this tool to you if you'd like. We hope that it will help you understand where your priorities fit within a group of peer organizations that you're at the workshop with. This is not just about consensus, but it's about some organizations will have different priorities to others, and maybe there's collaborative opportunities there when you work on different things, but you're working towards a common goal. This will also help the Excellence in Agronomy 2030 program think about key investments for its next business cycle. On a more person-to-person level, we hope that this process helps you discuss and learn from others and broaden your view on the different options. We can't address climate change by staying in our current silos and thinking narrowly. We need to broaden our horizons when we think about how to adapt to climate change at a systems level. And hope that this also opens up opportunities to talk about collaborative ventures and opportunities and how we can work better together, because we're all in the same game, and that's about getting the best outcomes for farmers from investment in climate change adaptation. I want to thank you for the interest that you've shown in attending a PAiCE workshop. There's a really big opportunity here to think about how we can work better together and develop better strategy for the farmers that we're serving. We also welcome feedback. My details are here if you'd like to discuss how to continue to develop and improve the PAiCE tool. Most of all, I hope you enjoy the workshop, and thanks again for attending.